Welcome to All Things Moore County, Moore County's weekly radio show highlighting the many facets of the Sandhills. That includes real estate, lifestyle, community and neighborhoods. And now from 4 Properties, here's your host, Bill Sahadi.
Good morning and welcome to the talk show, All Things Moore County. Dorothy, we're in the primary season.
Yes, we are, full swing.
And we had the privilege of speaking with some of the people on the school bond issue about 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And May 8th is a big day in Moore County.
Very big day.
It's a big day in the state of North Carolina. And it's a privilege for me to have Frank McNeill as our guest this morning. Frank is running in the Democratic primary on May the 8th in the 8th District for Congress. I've known Frank for the better part of 10 years. He's a lifelong Aberdeen resident, former mayor, school board member, has had a very successful family business, McNeill Oil and Propane, and I've had the privilege of working with him over the years, and I was always taken by Frank's demeanor, his kindness, his genuineness. Frank, good morning. The last time
Bill.
We saw each other, you were literally out digging some holes for me in a property in Knollwood in Southern Pines, and we were yakking and you were digging, and you have quite a pedigree, and you're a lifelong resident of Moore County. What, as grounded and as integrated as you appear to me, what is it in your DNA that made you make this transition to run for Congress?
It would have been a lot easier not to.
Right.
Life's a lot simpler, obviously, in Aberdeen than it is in Washington. But I guess it's the frustration of watching what's going on in Washington, the inability of our Congress to work together and really accomplish anything positive for us, the citizens of Moore County in the 8th District. Going back in history, they've always been fights between the various parties in Congress, but it just seems like it's gotten to the point that it's just nothing can be accomplished. Neither side seems to want to work with the other, and so we need to change that.
Yeah.
And I just feel like if I can get up there and other people like-minded can get there this year, we can start making a change.
And like-minded doesn't mean necessarily Democrat or Republican. It just means like-minded people who want to work together.
That really care about their communities
Yeah.
and want to see things done to move them forward.
You and I we're kind of contemporaries, and I've always watched the government from afar, and I've never seen it so bad. And I remember my father always saying, as a kid growing up, I can't believe they're fighting about this and fighting about that. That was child's play compared to what's going on today. How is it possible to change that climate? It seems like every election cycle, candidates will always come out and say that, okay, they get elected, they go to Washington, and they get sucked in by that dysfunctional system and all those idealistic notions sort of go by the wayside. But you think you can make that difference, at least you and other people like yourselves?
I do. Mark Twain once said, I'm opposed to millionaires in principle, but it would be dangerous to offer me the position.
Right.
And so that's kind of, I think, what happens to our officials. When they get elected, they go up, just like you said, they have an idea of the way they're going to govern, and then they get up, and it's hard to buck the system.
Right.
And so, I say I will, and I'm just determined that I'm going to go up and do what's right for our community, for our district, and then the consequences are what they are. I think what's happened over the years, money has become more and more ingrained into the government, both the House and the Senate. And the Citizens United ruling, just put that on steroids a few years ago, that allows corporations and individuals to give unlimited amounts of money to super PACs, and then the super PACs can spend the money in support of a candidate or against an opponent. And so as long as there's so much money involved, then it makes it tough for the congressman to do what the citizens want rather than what the special interests want. And so that's the first thing. If we can get the big money out of Washington, it'll take out the influence that'll make it so much easier to govern.
Talk to me a little bit about the 8th District, the demographics, and the value system that you want to take with you on behalf of the 8th District and why it's so important.
Sure. The 8th District begins in Spring Lake in Fayetteville and runs all the way to Concord and Kannapolis. So it's a part of Cumberland County, all of Hoke, Moore, Stanley, Montgomery, and Cabarrus County. So there's 5 counties that are completely in the district, part of Rowan County. So it's about a 3-hour drive across the district. And obviously you've got a large population center in Fayetteville at one end, and then Cabarrus at the other end. And then in between, it's fairly rural North Carolina.
Right. If I'm not mistaken, the Republican incumbent at this point, Richard
Correct.
Hudson, won 58% of the vote during the last election. And the promise of better jobs, higher wages, better health care, or a more effective, cost-effective health care, where we are now a couple of years down the road, you sense a discontent with the report card on some of those issues?
I do, and particularly the health care. The cost of insurance has gone up considerably the last couple of years, and the new rates will come out this fall, and I'm expecting they're going to be higher again. Congress has tried to address health care and access, and I think they've made some nice strides. I think where they have failed is in addressing the cost of health care. They've tried to look at ways to make insurance affordable through subsidies and things like that for the lower income. But what we've got to do is keep the cost down. If we can get the cost down, then the cost of insurance will follow it right back down. And prescription drugs are probably one of the biggest drivers. I've got a cousin that takes an injection for rheumatoid arthritis. It's $4,900 a month.
What?
For the treatment. Started out $900 a month, which is, to me, awfully high 8 years ago. Well, he's on Medicare, so he has to pay 5% of that, which is $250 a month. But that means you and I as taxpayers are picking up the other $4,500 a month, and $4,700 a month. And that's just one example. And so there's so many new drugs coming out that are being used, and the cost is just so high. When Congress added prescription drugs to Medicare back during George Bush administration, one of the parts in the law said the government cannot negotiate with the drug manufacturers over price. Well, there's no reason for that. That was just a self-serving caveat that was put in there, and we need to be able to negotiate. We need more insurers. We're down now in North Carolina to really practically one health insurer. We need several so there'd be competition. So I think that's an area that really needs to be addressed, and something's going to have to be done, or it's going to just become unaffordable for so many.
You identified a large portion of the district as being rural. I mean, geographically, the majority of the 8th District is rural. And jobs are a major concern, and wages are a major concern. You sense a lot of discontent amongst the citizens. They're not getting what they were hoping would come around with this new administration.
I don't know if discontent. I think frustration and disappointment might be more.
Yeah.
And in order to create the environment to attract jobs, it's kind of like the farmer. He plants his seed, and then he's got to fertilize it and cultivate it. And then if he takes care of it over the long summer, he's got to harvest in the fall. Well, the seeds for economic development are several things. Education. We've got to have a well-educated workforce to attract manufacturers or commercial jobs. We've got to have infrastructure. Obviously, got to have water and sewer available. High-speed broadband internet, which is not available in
the
a lot
majority
of
of
rural
North
areas.
Carolina. Right, that's correct.
And so good roads where you can get your raw materials in and your final product out.
Right.
And so the infrastructure is so important to economic growth. And manufacturing will not come if it's not there. They're not going to come and build and then wait 10 years for it to show up. And so we've got to plant the seeds and make sure our schools are good, make sure our infrastructure's in place and can handle it. And then the potential will be there for job growth. It's interesting in, here in Moore County, we've got a school bond on the ballot.
Yep.
And I certainly hope it passes.
Yep,
I
so
would
do I.
encourage all of Moore County citizens to go out and vote for it. It's badly needed. Our problem in Moore County is we don't have enough room for our school children. It's a growing population, and we're having to continue to build. In Stanley County, they have just exactly the opposite problem. Their buildings are half full. And so they really need to consolidate campuses. But the problem is your neighborhood doesn't want your school to close.
Right.
My neighborhood doesn't want mine to close. And so they've got the opposite problem. The reason that is they don't have the jobs there to keep the young people in the county.
Right.
They grow up and have to move away to get the jobs they need.
And Stanley's more of a rural county.
It is. Of course, Albemarle is a town of 15,000.
That's right.
It's bigger than any of ours down this way, but it's similar to Moore County. I mean, you get outside of Southern Pines, Pinehurst, it's rural eastern North Carolina.
Even if you get out of southern Moore County into northern Moore County, that difference is right there.
It's a big difference.
You're traveling a lot, are you not, these days?
I am.
You're a lifelong resident of Moore County. You grew up here. Your family started a business here.
Right.
You mentioned in one of the articles that I had read that you took pride in the fact that you were able to provide health insurance for your 30 or 35 employees. But each year, and I know exactly what you were saying, in order to keep the cost down, the benefits seem to decrease over time, or to keep the cost not rising.
Right.
You're getting decreased benefits. That's one of the forefront issues that you are concerned with.
It is. I'm trying to think back. It may have been 15 years ago. We probably had $500 deductibles.
That's right.
And
right.
and the rates were fairly low. And then before long, it went up to $1,000, then $1,500. Personally, my insurance that I chose, and we have 3 levels of insurance, and the employee chooses which they want because they're participating too in the in helping to pay for it. My personal one, I have a $6,000 deductible and no copays. So I'm going to spend the first $6,000 on myself every year, every doctor visit, prescription, whatever. And so just to keep the cost reasonable of the premiums.
Yeah. When you get outside of Moore County or Cabarrus County, the age demographic is older, is it not, in some of the rural counties?
You know, it probably is.
Yeah.
That's right, because the young families are not staying or moving in.
Yeah, and the health, right, and their younger people are coming here. They're out in the Charlotte area for sure. So the health care costs, I mean, we have a lot of baby boomers who are facing a lot of realities today that are way more expensive at this stage of their lives, where they're looking at retirement, but they're also looking at added costs to take care of themselves.
It is. We fortunately we're living longer.
Unfortunately,
we're living, and so we are facing health issues that our grandparents didn't face, and challenges.
Okay. The way people get their information and the way people get their news today is completely different from the time when you and I were growing our businesses and watching the news without all the cable and today all the social media. And that seems to have increased the polarization of ideas because so many people have sound bites that become their opinions, and then if you peel it away, there's no root system other than the sound bite.
Right.
And you get candidates, I have to tell you this, they're very charismatic, and they go out in their local district, and they, ring a bell with chemistry or whatever. They don't know the first thing about governing. I'm a little bit of a naysayer.
Well, again,
help me out.
When we were children, you had 3 networks.
Yeah.
And you watched the news.
That's right.
And they pretty much reported what was going on. And then you and I formed our opinion maybe on what was right, what was wrong. Now we have shows that act like news shows, but really they're entertainers, and they've got an agenda. Yeah. And they keep pounding that agenda.
Right.
And make it sound like it's news, or they try to imply that it's impartial news. You mentioned the sound bites.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, most voters' exposure to me or my opponent is going to be a 30-second television spot.
That's right. That's why we have you here.
And you can't learn a lot in 30 seconds. It's just like you said, one word, one bite.
Yeah.
And that's very unfortunate,
because
we need to be able to sit down, have a dialogue, and really get to know somebody.
Yeah.
And make an informed decision rather than just that quick sound bite.
And we're going to come back in the second set, and we want to talk a little bit about your history here and your upbringing and your values, and again, what got you to this place today. Our guest is Frank McNeill. He is running for Congress in the 8th District. The primary is next Tuesday, May the 8th. We'll be right back. Welcome back to All Things Moore County. We're going to continue our conversation with Frank McNeill, who is running for Congress in the 8th District. He's a native son. Frank, you and I we're kind of contemporaries. We graduated high school and college within a couple of years of each other. I won't say who was first and who was not. But I have to say that you're probably at a point in your life, and I want you to talk a little bit about your life here, where you're moving into a mode of you want to give back. And that's it's almost an altruistic motive in what you're doing. Mm-hmm. It's not, you're not looking to pad your pockets. You're not looking to, it's not an ego thing. It's a value-based decision that you've made, isn't it?
It is. When we were growing up, I think there was a different attitude of service.
Right.
We had a young president that said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We had the space program that went from nothing to 10 years later walking on the moon. And so, we came up when there was a lot of optimism and in the country, and created the Peace Corps. A lot of people participate in that. And so that's something that I just grew up with. As soon as I got back from college, joined the Aberdeen JCs. We were active doing projects, to try to help the community. I ran for the town board fairly soon after I got back from college and served 10 years there,
Mm-hmm.
then served a couple of terms as mayor, and later on the Moore County School Board.
Right.
But I've always enjoyed doing things for my community. And it just, I think it was the way I grew up. It was the way my parents taught me.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we grew up in a Scots Presbyterian home, and so that meant you're frugal, you don't waste your money, and you get value for what you're doing, but you also give value for what you're asking for. And so, this idea of service just seems to not be as prevalent today. If you go to your service clubs, your Rotary Club, your Lions Club, we're the young guys in it,
Right.
for the most part.
Right.
And so I would love to see there be that attitude of service become more prevalent in the generations coming up. I don't know if part of it was when we were young, we went out in the yard and we played with our neighbors. You got together, and first off, you had to decide what game are we going to play. Then you might have had to have come up with the rules of the game, agree on those. You chose up sides. We were learning leadership skills and didn't even know it out in the yard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you've got soccer leagues and volleyball leagues and little leagues and even the youth golf that is so structured to where the young people aren't making those decisions. They're told exactly what to do. And I think that's just a subtle thing that's being maybe lost today. But we've got to get back to where there's this idea of what can I do for my community. I'm the oldest of 4 children. Got a younger brother, 2 younger sisters. Had incredible parents. That's the best choice I ever made in my life.
Yeah.
Was when I chose my parents.
Yeah.
And so had a good home life coming up. Went through the public schools here in Moore County. Graduated from Appalachian State University. Had a great experience there. Came home and met a young lady from Southern Pines who was just 2 years younger than me, but we'd never met until I got back from college.
That's crazy in such a small community.
It is. But I mean, she grew up in her neighborhood. I grew up in mine. But and so we've been married for 37 years. Have 3 daughters, 3 grandsons. And if I'd known the grandchildren were so great, we'd have had them first. We would. No, we've been very blessed with our family. And of course, you mentioned our business. My grandfather started a little business here in 1928, and is still going today. McNeill Oil and Propane, and I'm currently president. And have 35 employees, and they're great. And we try to treat them like family because that's the way my grandfather, my father did.
The neat thing about being in this generation, or being the generation you're in and the age that you are at, you have a combination of life lessons learned. You have a perspective today where you can see the whole playing field, and you can make judgments not just for your generation but for your children's generation and your grandchildren's generation. And I have to tell you, your idealism is very credible, but I go back to the Cuisinart of the dysfunction in D.C. We don't want that idealism to get blown away by the dark skies and the clouds and that seems to be penetrating our day-to-day government activities. It's a tough challenge.
Well, I think we as voters can do something about that, and we got to change the faces in Washington.
Yeah.
If one person goes up, you get swallowed up.
Right.
But if we send 200 new faces,
right,
all of a sudden,
right,
we've got a new majority. We've got people that go up there and realize we can do it different.
The antithesis of trying to pay it forward, right, is feathering your own nest.
Yeah.
And that's what I think a lot of jaded people look at and think that there's so much disrespect for elected officials. Any poll you want to look at. I don't care if it's a Fox News poll or a CNN poll. I could care less. There's a distrust, and it gets stronger. It doesn't get weaker, and I think it's deteriorated just in these last 2 years to a point where I can't watch TV anymore without taking Advil, and I have to turn the volume down. It's just people are screaming at each other all the time.
They are. I'd mentioned I'd served on the town government in Aberdeen.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the beauties of that is you see your constituents every day.
Yeah.
And if there's a problem,
right,
they just walk into your office.
That's right.
Because it's just down the street. But, again, at that point, there's no pay for the job. It's a complete volunteer when you run for local government in most places. And so it is a labor of love. And you're doing it because you want to improve your community.
Right.
And so there's no reason why it can't be that way in Congress as well. We want to improve our communities and take care of those who voted to send us to Washington. And one thing I want to mention, you mentioned about the jadedness. Unfortunately, what happens, so many people go to Washington. They serve then when they're either defeated,
right,
or they get a better offer and they go join a lobbying firm or a consulting firm for huge amounts of money. David Bruton here in the county has been very active on so many things. He had a good friend that was a doctor, and they were working together. And then he was also a congressman. Well, they were working together on something having to do with health care. Well, as soon as it got done, the congressman went and took a job for over $1 million with a pharmaceutical company.
Right.
It just killed David's soul. That was the whole reason the congressman was working, that what he did to set himself up.
Feathering their own nest.
And so there ought to be laws to where you can't maybe go from that. I will say, I'm 62 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go to Washington for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go up 2 or 3 sessions, serve my community, and then when either you vote me out or I retire, I'm coming back to Aberdeen. I have no interest in taking a job in Washington, D.C., and too often that's the case, and it does change your outlook.
You look at yourself as having the ability, as one person, to reset the tone and the tenor. And if there were 50 other people or 100 other people who would do the same thing, there would be hope for some change.
I think so.
Right.
See, for me, it's not a stepping stone. I'm not looking to be a senator or
Right.
a president
Right.
or, like I say, get a big lobbying job.
Right.
I want to go serve my community.
Right.
Then I'm coming home because I love Moore County.
Yeah, it's all about paying it back and paying it forward, isn't it?
It is.
That's the sense that I get from you. I want to come back in the third set. I want to ask you just a couple of specific questions about some of the solutions or some of the things that you might specifically want to do to help remediate some of the issues that affect the citizens that will be voting next week. Our guest is Frank McNeill. He is running in the 8th District for Congress. The primary is next Tuesday on May the 8th. This is All Things Moore County. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our final set of All Things Moore County with our conversation with Frank McNeill, who will be running in the Democratic primary next Tuesday, May the 8th, for the 8th District Congressional seat. Anybody with your pedigree and where you are in your stage of life, you made the case to me that you're not doing this for what's in it for you. You're doing it because you want to pay it forward, and you're coming back to Aberdeen, and I believe you. And your sense of idealism is genuine and it's credible as I see it. And I'm from New York, so I'm supposed to be pretty intuitive. No. I've lived here in North Carolina for 19 years, and I love Moore County. I love the lifestyle. I like the values. I like the intimacy of the county, and I like the fact that you get to know people in a very organic way. There's not that anonymity of a big city. And this is where you've spent your 60-plus years raising your family. Does the idea of commuting back and forth to D.C. Put a little chill up your back?
I try not to think about it. I'm going to miss being in Aberdeen in Moore County every day. I mean that's it's going to be it's going to be a little bit of culture shock to it.
You think anyone up in D.C. would know you were from the South?
Only if I told them.
Yeah, they wouldn't pick it up.
Most people in the South have a distinct accent, but since mine's pretty neutral,
it's very neutral. I don't pick it up.
I'll have a name tag that says North Carolina or something, so they'll know.
Yeah, you should spend about a week in Manhattan and get in a cab, and they'll go, "What part of North Carolina are you from?"
I'll tell you a quick story. Okay. Years ago, I was up there visiting some friends. First time I'd ever been to New York. Went in a little deli and started to order. And I said, well, I'll have a, where you from? You've got an accent.
Right.
I thought, I've got an accent?
Yeah. But the New York accent can be grating, can't
it?
But it's, it's a new day, and you are looking obviously forward to the fall. And your Republican opponent, the incumbent, Richard Hudson, again, he came out of the Republican election with 58% of the vote. How do you get that turned around? That's a pretty large majority.
It is. That's a big difference.
58%.
Well, 2 years is making a big difference.
Yeah.
I think there's a different mood in the country this year. And so I think the wind's blowing at my back this year as opposed to in the face. That will help. The other is, I'm from the district. I've lived here. He hasn't had an opponent yet that really has mounted a strong campaign against him. And so we will have the resources to do that. Living in the district, a lot of people in Moore County know me that might generically vote for Richard, but they'll vote for me because they know me and they trust me. That'll be an advantage. But the other thing is we're just going to run a hard campaign. We're going to get out and meet a lot of people and get our message out. And I think that it's going to make a difference. I think we have an excellent chance of winning this fall. I didn't just run just to say I could run. I've run. I ran because with full intention that we've got the ability to win the race.
You started in the beginning of the show, you were talking about all the money in politics and the special interests, but it's expensive to run a campaign, and it's a necessary evil to get from here to there. Probably eye-popping to you since you've never really run for something on this level before.
The first time I ran for the town board, it cost me $5 to file.
Yeah.
And we spent no money advertising.
Yeah.
I just saw people on the street.
That's right.
We've got a budget of $1.5 million for this campaign.
Wow.
And that's obscene.
It is obscene.
And there's a lot of congressmen or a lot of congressional races will be a lot more expensive than that.
Yeah. And
so that precludes a lot of people from being able to run. But we've had a lot of support so far. People have been very generous, supporting both financially and with their time. And so I just feel like that by November we're going to have quite a bit of momentum going, and we're going to be in great shape.
I guess a noble goal for any campaign is to be able to communicate beyond the sound bites so that they can get to know you personally.
Right.
And make a judgment about you personally.
It is. And so we've had a lot of already little gatherings in people's homes where we can take a couple hours, talk, and exchange ideas. We'll continue to do that all summer and into the fall. And there'll be probably a few candidate forums to where we'll be able to appear in front of hopefully large groups that can get a little more information and not just have to rely on that 30-second commercial.
Right. Couple of questions, more specific, I guess. You've talked a little bit about it, but what do you consider to be the biggest issue facing you as House District 8, and what are you prepared to do?
Well, we talked a little bit. I believe that jobs are on a lot of people's minds, and in order to make it an attractive area for job creators to come into, we've got to have outstanding schools. And I think we're failing a little bit on that. We're not devoting the resources needed. We need to pay our teachers more. Mm-hmm. We need to have good facilities and do everything we can to properly prepare our young people to give them the job, to give them the education they need to be able to handle the jobs of the future. Obviously, each year the jobs get a little more sophisticated, a little more complicated, and so education is a huge key to that. And then making sure we have the infrastructure in there. And high-speed broadband internet is something that is really lacking around, and there needs to be concerted effort to get that out to, particularly into the rural areas, to help them compete. Otherwise, they just keep falling further and further behind as the jobs go to the urban areas.
People running all over the country from all 50 states have a congressional candidate who might be saying the same things to get their voice heard for their constituents.
Right.
In Moore County, we have over 800 nonprofit organizations. Every one of them has a reason to be. And they come on the show. How they get their voice heard above all others, how they fundraise, how they think outside the box, that's a challenge. Because you're out there fighting for North Carolina, but every other congressman is doing the same thing in the other states.
Well, there was I think it was a Toyota plant that was announced, and in Greensboro, fought very hard to get. It's ended up, it will go to Alabama. But you're exactly right. There is more demand for manufacturers than there are manufacturers. And so we've got to make sure that we excuse me. That we do everything we can in all phases so that we are attractive. Obviously, Moore County is a great place to live.
Right.
But if we don't have enough water and industry needs that, they've got to look elsewhere. If we don't have the highways that they can get in and out quickly, they'll look elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And so it's the whole piece of, it's the whole pie. Mm-hmm. We can't just have a few pieces in place. We've got to have them all.
Let me ask you a question about the new tax code that was just voted in. What's your take on it, and how does it shade a light on North Carolina?
I think it was weighted too heavily towards the ultra wealthy.
Yeah.
Not just people that have some money. I'm talking about the ultra wealthy and the large corporations. Oftentimes in the past, we've used tax cuts to help stimulate the economy. If maybe businesses were having trouble borrowing money, well, you give them a tax cut, that gives them cash to do things with. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the case now. Mm-hmm. Most businesses have more cash on their books than they've ever had in history.
That's right.
Interest rates are almost nothing.
Right.
3-4%. That's historically low. It's never been that low. And so we really didn't need the tax cut to stimulate the economy. And to me, it goes back to that big money. It was more of a giveaway to the people that have been giving millions and millions to the congressman. They said, okay, now we need payback. And it was called a middle class middle class tax cut, and everyone receives some cuts at all levels.
Right.
But those are temporary.
That's right.
And the ones for the big corporations and the ultra wealthy are permanent.
Just yesterday, Marco Rubio came out and said the effects of the tax cut, and he's a Republican, he doesn't see it working its way down in a way that would help those who are less fortunate than the ultra wealthy. And so you're getting a little bit of brushback from some Republicans, but honestly, I don't see a whole lot of brushback on anything from the party in power. I see silence. I see they're just complicit.
And I have nothing against ultra wealthy folks.
Sure.
As Mark Twain said.
Yeah.
And so I would welcome the chance to be wealthy. I think the bottom line is we all need to pay our fair share of taxes. And so if everyone pays their fair share, then the code is fair. And then the country will get the money it needs, and yet...
So the concept of fair share, shareness, or fairness in sharing came up just for me in January. I had to apply for Medicare.
Right.
You can have a lot of fun doing it. And I did it. And so I was so pleased because I was able to get the prescription plan. I was able to get on all the plans and basically provide myself with better medical coverage than I had had prior to, at a cost savings. That sounds like a good deal, right? 2 weeks after I was all signed up and I got all these emails and these passwords and had a headache, I get a letter that says, we've reviewed your account, and based on your income and this and that, you need to pay more, and because you fall into a higher level. And at first I thought, the system got me, but guess what? The system didn't get me. It's a privilege to be able to pay a little bit more, and that's the way it should be, so that the people who can pay more can afford the lower rates. And that's democracy at work. And I thought to myself, this isn't something to poo-poo. This is a good thing.
Right.
It's a privilege to be able to pay more. And I think you feel the same way.
I do.
Yeah.
When they changed the health care, the Affordable Care Act, it did away with pre-existing conditions.
Right.
And so, obviously, those who had been sick with diabetes or other things that would have run their rates up, they were going to get it cheaper. Well, I was lucky. I was healthy. So I'd been getting fairly cheap rates. Mine were going to go up. And at first, I thought, well, I don't like that. But again, I thought, I believe I'd rather be healthy and have to pay a little extra.
That's right.
Than to be sick and get less. So it works out.
We hope you have a very busy 4 or 5 months coming up, May, June, July, August, September. I think you've made a case for the type of public servant you would be, and where it comes from. I was touched by this. There are so many articles that people can go and read about you if they just Google you. The Pilot has done a couple of very nice articles, but the whole concept of that philosophy, I'd love you to talk about that, because it seems so consistent with what you're talking about.
Right. Well, this is something that Pat Taylor, who was a candidate for governor, said. It says, you can't pull yourself up by your own bootstraps unless you have boots. And there are still a lot of shoeless children in North Carolina.
Yeah, it's true.
It is. And too often, I think, folks are critical of those in dire need. And they say, well, why don't you? Go get a job. Go do something.
Yeah.
And that's very easy to say when you're over here.
Right.
And so there are people out there that need help. And, of course, the challenge to us as a government is to truly help those people, give them the opportunity, give them the tools they need, the education, the opportunity to get started so that then they can go on their own, stand on their own 2 feet, and be productive members of our communities. And so it's a fine line, but we need to reach out and help those in need and make sure that they've got the opportunities that so many of us just take for granted.
Your moderate position and your moderate demeanor and your moderate candor is very appealing. I can see you working, as they say, both sides of the aisle, because it's all about the people. It's not the party. It
is.
Right?
It really is. And I said we need a couple of hundred new faces up there, Democrat and Republican.
That's right.
We need to have folks
Couldn't agree with you
don't
more.
all think alike, but that are willing to work together and share our ideas. And I take the best from you, and you take the best from me, and let's make it better than either one of us individually.
That's right. Why are you the best candidate to defeat Richard Hudson in the fall?
There are 2 other candidates in the primary. They're from Charlotte, and so they don't actually live in the district. I do. I've lived here all my life. But as I got to thinking about it, for the past 40 years, I've been preparing for this job, and not really consciously, but through local service. I've had the experience working with local government and working with others to get things done in a governmental setting. Through my business, we've grown a business, created jobs, provided what our employees needed, taken care of our customers. And so I think my life experience gives me the tools needed to be an effective and a good representative of our district. By living in the district all my life, I know what it's like. I know the people here. And so, again, I've got the experience to truly represent and be a voice for our district.
People can go on your website. Is Frank?
They can.
Frank McNeill for Congress?
It's McNeill.
McNeill.
4, the number 4,
Okay.
Congress. McNeill4Congress.com.
We wish you well this summer and into the fall. We get yourself through May the 8th, and tell your wife you'll see her in I don't know, November
for a couple of days.
Yeah,
there we go. Yeah, well, I do. I certainly ask the voters for their support on May 8th,
right.
And then in the fall as well. But thank you so much for letting me be here this morning, get to chat with you.
It's a pleasure. I'm glad you could come in. We talked a few weeks ago, and it just occurred to me that this would be something that we should do. And Election Day, primary day, is on Tuesday, so it's right around the corner.
It is.
And thanks for coming in. We wish you the best of luck, Frank.
Thank you, Bill. So good to be here.
My pleasure. Frank McNeill, running for the 8th Congressional District, Congress. Get out and vote on May the 8th. This is All Things Moore County. Thanks for listening.